So we wanted to start off with talking about, and we did this last time as well, what are our guiding principles? And so Jason and I sat to sort of really rethink this. When we think about building a product, we want to make sure we're oriented to the right kind of guiding principles around technology, right? We're not a very large team, and so we want to use every resource wisely. We want to make sure that we're dedicating our time and energy wisely. So these are really the sort of the four cornerstones of the way we approach our technology. And this year, besides the Serenity product that you'll be hearing extensively about here in a minute, it's really soup to nuts, right? Not just from the rep in the field with their iPhone or their iPad, but the analyst in the back office or the manager or the executive running reports. The reports need to be reliable. The data needs to be accurate. And so we're doing a lot around not just the front end, but a tremendous amount around the back end to focus on reliability. When we talk about consistency, something that we've noticed in the industry, and we've been guilty of this as well, is there are a lot of products out there from companies that are kind of, bubblegum and duct tape sort of stuck together. And we really want it to be one seamless experience. And so you'll see with the introduction of Lightning, which you've heard a lot about, with Serenity, which you're about to hear a lot about, that we're really trying to build a very consistent user pattern around the way that we design our apps, the way that our users interact with our applications. So consistency is certainly very important, and we think a key to driving adoption. And we want your reps and your managers, we want everyone excited about the tools that they're using, right? We don't want them poo-pooing it. Cutting edge, sort of, I think goes without saying, but we really have, I think in our 10 years, tried to remain committed to using the latest technologies available. This isn't the pharmaceutical industry, which was 15 years ahead of almost every other industry. I think everyone knows, for the most part, beverage alcohol has been sort of a laggard when it comes to technology. And so we have a lot of great models that I think we can point to and learn from. And Salesforce in that regard has been a great partner, right? Is principles like, what are the things we do in our everyday lives when we're interacting with applications, whether it be Gmail, Facebook, Twitter? What are those things that work in our mind very easily, and how do we apply them to our business software, right? So I think it's cutting edge from the raw technology standpoint, but also just philosophically the way that the software is developed. And so we're doing a lot of fun things with progressive web applications, really doubling down on our commitment to web-based applications. 10 years ago, half the people we talked to, we'd spend an hour, 2 hours just talking about cloud. And is it okay to have your data in the cloud? Thankfully, we don't have those conversations anymore, right? We're well past that. And now we get to focus on, how we solving some of the unique problems that your team has when they're out in the market. So, anything you want to say about that?
You're good.
Okay, thanks. So we'll go into a little more detail on some of that in a minute. And then last but not least, we want our product to be extensible. And by that, we're really talking about how it can be customized to suit your needs. And Tim and I came out of, really the company, in some ways was born out of the fact that we were both Salesforce consultants. We knew a lot about the product, but it made no sense to build a different solution every single time we worked with each of you, and that's why we have the product that we have today. But along those lines, many of you in this room are doing things very differently. And so whether you're fully adopting the way we look at the world and the language that we use or not, we want to make sure that the product can adapt to your needs. And I think those of you in the room that have been customers for 4, 5, 6 years know that it's a very easily adaptable application. I think that we can stay way ahead of your business needs in ways that other applications can't, right? So that's important for us, is to make sure that every new feature that we build, right, we have either a setting we can turn on or off, or an easy way to rename it. And certainly our international customers, right, translations and all of that have been super important for us from day one. So I moved this up to the front because you're going to see bits and pieces of this as Jason and I go out through our presentation. If you're new to the GreatVines family, you know that we have our theme of sci-fi movies and TV. These are our quarterly releases for the remainder of the year. And so as we talk about some of these features in detail, we're going to talk about Futurama and Doctor Who and Iron Giant. If you ever want to name a release, come talk to us. We're very open to that. We've had 52 of these, so we're starting to run out of creativity. But yeah, these are the next couple of releases. District 9 is what we are rolling out to customers now. We decided to not focus extensively on that. What you're going to see me demo is essentially our District 9 release, which was the first quarter of 2019. But really, Jason owns and runs this process. And when you come to Greg or Kara and want a new feature, they have to argue it not just with him, but with a whole committee of folks about, if something else goes on this list, then something's getting is sliding back. So we put a tremendous amount of energy into figuring out the cadence of these items and how are we meeting the most number of customers' needs at once.
They're good arguments.
They are.
Good discussions.
Debates.
Yeah.
So we've sort of broken it down into our desktop application, our mobile suite, and then sort of the back office data layer that keeps it all together. So we've got a slide that we'll talk on that as well. But happy to revisit this if folks have questions later in the day. When you see Q2, by the way, that really means that, for example, we've been working on Futurama this quarter, right? So at the end of March, correct me if I'm wrong, right, Futurama becomes available to you, right? So these are really the target release dates, not the time in which we're developing them. So good to keep in mind. Okay, so we'll talk about Serenity. So this is a very important sort of pivot for us. Pivot sounds the wrong word, right? It sounds like we're changing course. That's not the case. But it certainly is I would say, groundbreaking technology for us. We've been working on it for 2 years. Serenity, as you might imagine, was just one of our releases, right? It was in that long line of quarterly releases. And then mid last year, we realized we'd spent the whole quarter just working on getting this Serenity thing ready to go, right? And so it kind of became the name of this. We're using the term framework, right? Which sounds a little technical, but I think it's important because Serenity is driving every new feature that we're building. It's not just our mobile app. It's some of the new cool features that you're going to see today, like our visit sequences. It's our new photo browser that's coming out. Every new feature we talk about, from account plans, as far out into the future as we can see, will be built in Serenity. And the reason for that is, with Jason having a small team, we want to have sort of one unified code base. That probably doesn't mean a lot to many folks in the room, but it's certainly important, right? So that way we're not building one thing in Salesforce's language and another in Apple's language and a third one in Android's language. We have one unified framework that we have built. And that framework uses the exact same technology. Anyone here that has a Gmail account, it's the exact same technology that Google uses for Gmail, right? So it's 100% pure, cutting edge web technology, right? It's not an iOS app that you find on the store. So you're going to see it used today. When we talk about fully responsive, those of you that have been on our apps for a long time know that our app originally, the one we've had out for 6 years, was really built for the iPad. And we have a number of customers now on Windows tablets, and it's stuck in iPad size. And those that want to use it on a phone, it's like an iPad size scrunched down to your phone. And so when we talk about responsive, we want the app to be beautiful, functional, very usable, regardless of what device you're using. And to illustrate that today, we have a Google tablet. We're showing it on Android phones, iPhones. So it really doesn't matter where you are, as long as you have a device that is online. That's what's important. So as I said, Serenity is really the backbone of not just the mobile app, but it's all of our new forward-looking development that we're doing. Yes, so to kick off kind of our new mobile application, those of you that have been administrators and folks like James, we've spent countless minutes and hours while our old app was kind of loading and syncing stuff to the background. And we kind of want to demonstrate for you the difference. We were going to use that Air Server app, but we can't get them to talk to one another, probably because of the hotel's Wi-Fi. So the first thing to know about the new mobile experience is everything is available on mobile.greatvines.com, right? So we're bypassing the Apple App Store. We're bypassing the Google Android Store. It actually makes it a lot easier for your users, but also, more importantly, makes it easier for us because we don't have to push an update to Apple and wait. Some of you in the room looking at James, we've got to push a container and wait 5 days for Apple to review it and approve it, right? This makes it a lot easier. So we're kind of going straight to the source. And so I'm going to give you the view from the laptop world because we can't get the HDMI off the other device. And so when you log in with your same credentials, this is immediately what you get, right? And what's cool, one of the many things that I think is great about this application, you'll notice some familiarity with the old app, but because of the technology we're using, we actually sync in the background now, which means if your reps, which many of them do, because we see the tickets, log in, they open the app, it starts syncing, they close the app, they open their email. Immediately, they've sort of messed up the sync, right? Because the sync only runs when the app is in the foreground. So now they can actually run in the background, which is beautiful. And it syncs 2,000 records per second. So some of you that, some of our larger customers are syncing 600,000-800,000 accounts. And particular our distributor customers have giant data sets, sales orders, brands, all of that. So now it can actually be capable of syncing millions of records, even down to your phone if it needs to. So that's a real game changer.
And I would add to that the old mobile app, if the sync got interrupted, sometimes it would have to start all the way from the beginning again. This one can pick up right where it left off. So even if it gets interrupted, it can just resume, which is great.
Is there a foot ledge? No ledge. I can't put my foot down. All right, I'll stand. So one of the concepts that we're introducing with the new mobile app is what we call the waffle menu, the 9 little dots that you see in the upper left, right? That must have been a reload button. Where's my, there it is, that little menu up there. So we don't have the same sort of navigation that we used to. You see it pops out on the left. There's some cool concepts here that don't exist in our old application. One, we can now sync anything. So not only do we have this screaming fast sync performance that you can use to jaunt off into the wilderness with no internet and take surveys and grab photos and log visits, but we also can extend your custom applications. So some of you we've built custom add-ons for. Those can live seamlessly inside the application now, which is great. So as you look down the left, for example, you see that we've got this concept of My Lists. So should your users be adventurous enough, they can now customize the lists of data that they want available to them with all that data syncing offline to their device. We've got of course, we continue to be very GPS driven. All of our data is geolocated. All of your accounts are geocoded. So, of course, so is the device. And so we, very quickly able to pull up the accounts nearby our current location, for example. Looks like Tim's computer is set to be in San Francisco. And I loaded 2,000 Brooklyn accounts into this, but anyway. We'll probably jump back to that. So the other thing, of course, all your selling content, all of your sell sheets is still offline, still tagged to your brands. So that way when you're working on objectives, and you'll see dozens of examples that Tim will go through later today, and you're trying to sell in a certain brand, a label, a SKU, you'll have all of that sales content, your sell sheets and your PowerPoint decks and all that just one tap away, which is really nice. And of course, your embedded dashboard, which is the same that we've always had. So you can present whatever reports and dashboards you want to your users offline. But then these little apps that you see with the lightning bolts here, those are essentially Salesforce Lightning apps, things that we've embedded. It could be your website, it could be your intranet, it can be any either iOS, like if you have a corporate app that's built for iPads, we can have a button that opens that app. But if it's something that we've built for you inside of GreatVines, we can essentially tie it to a button, and that button can load the app right inside of Serenity, right? So the last thing that I'll point out about this side menu is it's a lot smarter than the old app, so it remembers what you do. So as you do searches for names of accounts or you pull up certain lists, and we'll pull up a few lists here in a minute, you'll see what I mean. It'll just keep an index of those for you so that way you can very quickly get back to what you're looking at, right? My key accounts in Metro New York that I haven't visited in 30 days. All right, you pull up that account, it's going to immediately stay on the left side so that it's just one tap away, okay? Down the left side here are some examples of lists. Do we call them tiles or cards? I'm not sure. Cards. So you see this new card format. All these lists have these different cards, right? These are accounts where I have open objectives that I'm working on. That's an example, key accounts I haven't visited in over 30 days. Or my open tasks. But now, in our old app, we had tasks, objectives, and events. Now we can have anything, right? So anything that you want to show to your users. Maybe it's your quarterly incentive programs. Maybe it's your trade marketing programs, right? We can show those lists for your team, so that way they're just one click away, right? So we've got our Martini Nights program here for Griffin Bay. We've got our holiday wine and whatever that is for our Chateau St. James brand, right? Let me zoom in and make this a little bit easier for you to see. There you go. So all these different sets of data that are available for you just one tap away. Okay. Let me dive into the lists a little bit. So you'll see here that not only do we have your standard lists of accounts like we did before, and you can of course sort things by city and different, you go across the tables and sort them any way you'd like. But for those of you that are very hands-on as administrators inside of Salesforce, all of your list views are now available. And this was a big pain point for folks. We only had 8 lists of accounts and contacts that you could look at, that you had to sort of live with. Now you can create them on the fly. So as an administrator, you could decide to create that list of accounts that's filtered down by some data. Accounts, non-buys in upstate New York, filtered by these 4 zip codes. That list can be created by you as an administrator in browser or by the user and available in Serenity minutes later, right? So very real time, which is great. So having all those lists, and it extends not just to your accounts, it extends to sort of any amount of data that you're looking to share. For example, account calls, which seem like it's a cornerstone of GreatVines. There was no place to go and look at your account calls in our old mobile app, right? So we thought, okay, rather than just extending that circle out and putting more objects in the box that you can look at, let's just make every bit of data within GreatVines available. And because we have this significantly faster sync performance, we don't have to really worry that you're going to sync invoices, or you're going to sync sales orders, or you're going to sync shipments. As long as your device has the storage, it'll sync it. So it does put a little more responsibility as the administrator to think about how much data you're pushing out there. And our implementation and success team can work with you to make sure you're not overloading someone's brand new iPhone with a bunch of data they don't need. So here we have all sorts of different lists that we can show to the users. And when I mentioned earlier, it can be customized. For your more advanced users, there are some ways, and it will be well documented, it'll be part of the Serenity trainings, that they can actually decide what lists that they want to see. So if you've got a merchandising team or a trade marketing team that wants to see different information than your distributor management team, it could be completely tailored to the end user if they so wish to. So I'm going to start out and pull up a key account. Let's go to our key account list. Pull up an off-premise. Let me just do a search here. We still have the same sort of model of keyword searching, right? Here's our Abbey Liquors account. So when we look at the account page, kind of some fundamental differences that you're going to see here. The first is what we call highlights. And so these are photos that we've taken. The highlights are metrics or fields that we've taken from your accounts that you've designated. It could be 3, 6, 9 different fields that you want to see that are going to be the most relevant. It's also going to be consistent with our desktop interface when you're looking at it. So you can determine what data you want to see as a highlight. And of course, if I'm in phone mode, right, it's pretty much the first thing you're going to see about the account, right? Looks nice and pretty on the phone, right? Which our old one didn't do. Let me switch back to iPad. Zoom in for you. Okay. Of course, all of our account photos that we've captured in the account. And again, as we've talked before, these can be tagged to your brands, to what location in the account. You can tie them out to certain objectives. Of course, you can always take survey. They can be photos taken from surveys. So that's your photo list. And then down at the bottom, we have the activity timeline. And this is where we start to introduce, you'll see some more of our, the lightning icon language, if you will. So we have icons tied to all the different types of events, whether they be surveys, account visits, promotional events, order commitments, whatever they are, you're going to get this nice timeline. And it's whether you're the account manager or whether you're or what we call the account owner, or you're just a manager looking at this account, it's going to kind of operate in that context. So you see here it says, you recorded an email that was sent to Nancy Smith, or you recorded in a visit. Otherwise, it'll show the name of the user that did it. So it's just kind of a nice natural language way of looking at the history of the account. We can see when we surveyed an account, if we want to show the points that we earned from that survey, that sort of thing. All of this can be customized. Remember, we talked about extensibility. So in terms of the data that you see in your timeline, maybe you want to see the person that you met with when you had this calendar event, for example. That can all be shown right here within the app. The next thing that we want to talk about, and this is a real fundamental change, I think, for us in the way that we think about our mobile app, and that's what we call a visit sequence. So for years, we've had customers say to us, how do I script, for lack of a better term, what the reps do when they visit these accounts, right? Those familiar with our old app, there's a bunch of yellow buttons, and you can hit a button to load a visit. You can hit a button to create an objective or take a survey. But you were sort of at a crossroads. You could go any direction that you wanted, right? We had no way of enforcing that the rep did a certain thing or didn't do something. We certainly had no idea how long they were spending doing any of that, right? So we took a long time to really think about what a visit is. And so you'll hear the term sequence, and it's reflected in the app with this little flowy icon up here, right? That guy. So whenever that icon shows up, it means that an administrator has defined a sequence that's unique to this account. So what does that mean? A sequence can be specific to on or off premise. That's obvious. You can create a sequence for a segment. So Tim talked earlier about segmenting your accounts. Who are those top 20%? You probably want to have a different sequence if you're going into a key account that's driving a ton of volume than one that's non-buy, right? You're going to talk about different things. You're going to record different things. You may have different goals for non-buys and growing points of distribution or accounts sold. So the sequence can be unique by type of account. It can also be unique by the type of user. It can also be unique by the geography. So all that's to say, you can have an on-premise sequence for a merchandiser in New York that's different than a distributor manager in Texas calling on off-premise. You could have dozens of different sequences. Hopefully you won't. But the concept is you can get really, really tailored about what type of account am I calling on, what is the role that I play, what am I trying to accomplish, right? So I clicked the wrong icon. Let me do this. Okay. So clicking on that icon opens up this sort of path, if you will. And this sequence had already been started. So you can see that the app already has picked up where we left off, and it will essentially, with the green indication, let me know that I've completed these steps. Another term that you'll hear us throw around is steps of the visit, right? That's kind of a common thing, is what are the individual steps that I'm taking? Now, again, to be flexible and extensible and let you decide how you want to enforce your sales process, these can be required. You can also determine, do you want them to go specifically in this order or not? Are they allowed to bounce around, right? So we've built in the capability to be very strict if you want to be. They've got to start on step 1, they've got to finish it. They've got to go to step 2, they've got to finish it. They have to go to step 3. Or do you care? Maybe none of them are required. Maybe it's just guidance, right? So you have the option to figure out how strict you want to be at kind of walking them through this path, right? The other thing is, it's not just the old yellow buttons from our old mobile app. It's not just survey and account visit. It's look at a list of objectives. It's look at the embedded dashboard for this account. It's create a follow-up task, create a follow-up event, right? We've really, I think, been very creative about figuring out what do you want to be able to slot into these sequences as steps. And so as an example, because we think it's a best practice, if I'm walking into the 19th hole, I should probably look at their dashboard. Let me see what they bought, how recently. Anything that you decide to expose and show to your users, it's going to immediately pull up my on-premise dashboard. It's going to filter the data for this account, right? So that's step 1. Step 2 in this particular sequence happens to be look at my list of objectives. And you notice because we've not locked it down, I can bounce around if I want to. But it is possible to, there's a setting that says enforce the order, which basically means you've got to do it in sequence. It will not let you bounce around. And by the way, John talked about our customers internationally. It's really a lot of our international customers that are asking for that, is they want it step 1 through 10 in that order, every step's required, right? So by no means do you have to be that strict in the way you implement these sequences. So step 1 was view the dashboard. Step 2 was look at the objectives. Step 3, in this case, was fill out the account call details. You see here we've put in tons of fields. I think, as you know, you can have 3 fields on your account call. You can have 20 fields on your account call. It's completely up to you. You're probably not going to normally show them the geolocation of their device. That's something that we would capture on the back end of the call. But next, we've got an example of an activity step, right? So any of our 15 different activities, whether it's securing a menu feature, or by the glass placement, a cocktail menu, a display, if you're doing a staff training, these can all be steps, right? And if you really think about it, this is subtly reinforcing to your team every time they make a call on an account. These are the important things for us to think about when we're at this account, right? So it's not just kind of giving them the guidance. It's a constant training process of these are the things. Oh, I forgot to talk about getting that cocktail menu placement. Well, here it's going to prompt me to do that every time, right? So I can see that we've already got we've got a cocktail menu at the 19th hole already. If we wanted to add photos to it, we can do it right from our device with our camera, or even from your photo roll. We're having to we'll talk about photos in a minute, so we have to rethink photos in the grand sense as people move to these hybrid tablets, right? It's not just iPads with a camera anymore. Now it's Windows tablets and Google tablets and all of that. So you can add photos onto those cocktail menus. And then when we jump into surveys, of course, should look and feel pretty familiar, right? So here we've got here's just a general survey that we can fill out. Jason's going to give you a very exciting overview of the brand new survey tools that are coming. But at the end of the day, when people are filling in a survey, it's going to look and feel familiar, right? It's either going to be a grid with a table of questions and your different product sizes. Everyone in this room that does GreatVine surveys is doing it differently. And so we will continue to support all those different ways. But you'll hear some great stuff about what we're doing to change up and make it better for you as an administrator. So we've still got our different sections and groups of questions. We still have the ability I'll just go ahead and submit this even though it's incomplete. We still have the ability to score all the questions, right? Generate a numeric score. And then as you do that, you can also, of course, create your objectives from your questions. So Tim will talk a bit about that around survey management, right? So we scored 101 points on this survey, which is pretty good given I left it all blank. 0 out of 101, sorry. Read that wrong. We didn't meet any of our targets on this survey. But what that means now is that all of our questions are available to become an objective. And I'm not going to beat on the objective horse. Tim's going to do plenty of that today about why it's critical to take what you just learned about this account and turn it into an actionable item, right? And so that's right here. We can create objectives out of all the questions for which we've defined targets. And correct me if I'm wrong, in a sequence, will I be able to take multiple surveys back to back?
Yes. Yes, you can.
Cool.
So if you go back to the survey step, you'll have the ability to choose a new survey.
Okay. Perfect. So then just to kind of show you the last 2 pieces of this visit sequence, create a follow-up task, right? CRM 101, best practice, always have a task for every account that you call on. It may be a year from now, maybe a year and a half from now, and maybe next week. Whatever it is, if your reps don't have a task somewhere, then they're really not doing their jobs. How do they know what they're going to do to advance that account, right? So as a best practice, follow-up task, maybe even schedule the calendar event now while you're in the account. All right, so these can all be done quickly and easily. The plus sign will allow you to fill in whatever you want. You, of course, most of you in this room are the ones driving what they're filling in about these tasks and objectives. So you can assign a task to somebody else. Now, when we get to the end of this process and we click End Visit, so we've completed that visit. It's going to fill it all out on the timeline. It's going to upload any photos that we've taken. But now, because we have this concept of a sequence, we had to start it and we had to end it. We now know how long that took. Now, I wouldn't run out and tell all your users that we're going to be timing them, but it's an important feature to know that it exists. Should you choose to use it? Completely up to you. Again, our international customers, they want to know exactly how long those visits take. We can also, as we've always done with our app, is we can tell you whether they were at the account, were they down the street, or were they 5 miles away, right? So if you would really like to get very specific, how long were they there, and were they actually there, or are they at home logging calls, in between Xbox games? We can help you figure that out. A common question that gets presented to us in either the sales process, usually comes up on sales calls, is do you do geofencing? And if you've heard that term, it may be a little confusing. And just to explain, John does it more elegantly than I do, but geofencing is not the approach that we believe in. Geofencing means unless you're inside this fence, you can't perform your activity. And some of our competitors and partners have apps that do that. And you may be standing inside that fence. Well, guess what? Your device doesn't think you're standing inside that fence, right? So our philosophy is we're going to record what they do and where they do it regardless, right? We're not going to stop them from doing anything. But as a management tool, if you want the data, if you want to know, like, I kind of suspect this person wasn't actually at the account, talk to our team. We've got the ability to tell you the distance that they were from that account when that activity occurred, right? It certainly doesn't need to drive your sales strategy, but it's data that is available to you. And then again, what we're augmenting that with is, well, how long did that take? And that's data that we don't necessarily need to show to the user. If you want to, you can. If you want to create a competition around, who's scoring the most survey points in the least amount of time during a visit. I mean, that off the top of my head. But it opens up a new metric that you can use as part of your sales strategy. Are we on time? Probably way late, given all the technical stuff. All right. I think that covers off all of this. We want to switch back briefly into the browser. And I'm going to pass it over to Jason to talk about surveys. Make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah. Last one is we have redone the photo browser, again, in the Serenity framework. And so in our very next release, which they just packaged Friday, the photo browser will actually be in the mobile app, which is really cool. It also, of course, will replace the photo browser that you have in your desktop experience today. So again, all the same mantra, built-in Lightning design, part of the Serenity framework. Our aim was to make it easier to quickly filter photos, group photos, sort them, download them, share them with your partners, right? And so now you can do that if you're sitting in a cafe on your device as opposed to your laptop. Everyone has heard us talk about Lightning. Who's a customer in the room? We just produced an hour-long video that I recorded that Kara's team will be sharing with anyone who's interested, just to orient you to what Lightning is, which is the desktop experience. The important point we want to make here is Salesforce is turning it on in October, whether you like it or not. So we're at the point where we're going to have to start telling you, like, we're going to turn it on in August. So Greg and Kara are doing a great job leading an initiative. Every one of you in this room that is a GreatVines customer, we need to be moving you to Lightning now, so it doesn't nip us, let's get it done now. But it's a great new experience, and it happens to mirror Serenity. So I talked earlier about consistency, right? Serenity was designed to be very, very comfortable and familiar with the Lightning desktop experience. Okay, I'm going to shut up and let you do the.
Can I take that for me?
Please.
Great. I'll trade places with you. All right, so now it's my turn to get to chat. So I'm excited to be up here today to talk about our new survey experience that we're calling Dynamic Surveys. I'm going to try to get through this relatively quick because we're running a little late. But surveys, I think the way to look at it is Tim mentioned earlier, tracking, measuring things, right, that kind of stuff. And survey is a big part of that. And so what I'm going to be talking to you about today, which some of you are already looking at the slides, dynamic surveys, what they are. We're going to talk about a new streamlined survey taking experience and some new scoring models. And I'll just touch briefly on the photo browser. One of the enhancements on the new photo browser is making it easier to find photos related to specific surveys that you've taken, as well as specific survey questions. So it'll be a great improvement there as well. I've had the pleasure, again, I've been with the company for 7 months. I've had the pleasure to speak to quite a few people about some of the frustrations with the current method of managing surveys in the account. And the current way that it works right now is we have a survey plan that you can build and create a survey. And then based on various criteria, you can assign those surveys out to specific accounts and reps and that kind of stuff. And I think what I've heard is that people have a need for creating very targeted surveys. Jim kind of touched on this a little earlier too, right? And so what happens is they'll create a survey, and then they'll make multiple copies of that survey. They'll do minor tweaks to those surveys, and then assign those surveys out to specific accounts. And so in kind of talking and thinking through this, what we came up with was this new method that you see on the right. It's your right, yeah. Is that you still have the ability to create surveys and assign those out to users and accounts based on the same criteria, but we've added a new visibility control on the question level. And so what this is going to allow you to do is really define at the question level who can see specific questions on the survey. So what that means is that as an admin, I can create, instead of creating 10 different surveys for very specific accounts or segments, territories, whatever that is, you can actually define as a section on your survey those specific questions that show up for those accounts. So we think this will be a lot easier to manage. So you can have one survey that has these very targeted things, as well as all the broad questions that go out to all accounts, versus having to manage 10 different surveys. On top of that, we have this new experience of taking surveys. So when Jim was demoing Serenity, you saw on the survey step there, you have the drop down of the different surveys that you can choose to take when you're visiting an account. It's the same way with our current mobile app. So the process is a little bit cumbersome for a rep out in the field. They've got to go to an account. They've got to take each of those surveys individually, right? And so what we're planning to do is basically take, when the sales rep visits an account and they start a survey, the app will determine what surveys and what questions apply for that account based on who's taking that survey, and it will thread them all together into a dynamic survey. And so from the sales rep's point of view, they only need to hit the button, take survey, and then go through and answer the questions. They don't have to go, okay, which survey am I taking? Oh yeah, I've got to go back and take that other survey. So we think this is going to really streamline the process. It's going to make it a lot easier and quicker for sales reps out in the field to manage. So how do we do this? I'm going to show you some screenshots here. This is a complete redesign of our admin interface for managing surveys. This is all, we're still in the design phase right now, so I'll talk about what the schedule is for this. But so we've basically looked to redesign the whole interface. We're using the Lightning interface design system that Jim mentioned, which is the basis for all of our new features going forward. And we're creating a wizard type approach. So we'll guide you step by step into creating a survey. And we start with real basic, like, name your survey. This is the same stuff that you have today. The next step is actually building your survey. So there's two screenshots here. If you look on the right side, you see the survey question bank. And what this is as you create your questions in your question bank, you have the ability to go and filter and search and find the questions that you want to add to your survey. And then once you find those questions, it's going to be really easy to just drag and drop from the question bank onto your survey. Same thing in terms of reordering questions. So if you want to reorder questions on your survey, you just drag and drop them and reorder them. And the best part is that if you're familiar with creating surveys today, you know that as you're building it, you've got a preview button you've got to hit. It takes a little bit, loads up what it's going to look like from the end user's perspective. This is going to let you see what the survey will look like as you're building it. So you can see here the screenshot at the bottom. Once you've dragged the question, it's going to actually appear like it would appear if you're actually taking the survey. So you can see it as you build it. We've talked a little bit earlier was mentioned creating different grids and whatnot. So the new layout control for clusters. Basically, a cluster allows you to ask one question across multiple products. So what we've done is basically, we haven't really changed what clusters do, we've just changed how they work a little bit. So in this example, we define a cluster that's based on brand and size, and we set up the cluster, we choose what brands we want in there, we choose what sizes we want in there. We're going to allow you to actually choose which ones you want to appear as the rows and which ones you want to appear as the columns. And that's all that you need to do to define your cluster. At that point, it's the same approach that I just talked about. You take a question from your survey bank and you drop it into the cluster. Now, when you drop a question into the cluster, because of how you've configured the cluster, we know how to create that grid for you. So in this example, we're asking number of bar facings, and we've created a grid of input boxes to collect those responses based on the different brands and sizes that you defined in the cluster. So we think this is going to be a lot easier if you're familiar with the current interface for creating clusters and questions. You should be thinking, wow, this is going to be way easier to do, right? Okay, so now that we've talked about how to build a survey by adding questions and clusters, I'm going to touch briefly on how to edit details of a question. So when you have a question on a survey, you can edit the details of it, and we allow you to edit various things. So this screen right here is showing a target answer, and what that means is basically as you build the survey, you can define what your target range is. So if we're asking for a number of tap handles, we expect to have greater than or equal to 2 tap handles is what we're setting up here. On top of that, we have validation, which basically says that we expect an answer between 0 and 10. So if they enter something like 100, maybe they double hit the 0, we can say, hey, your answer is out of range, go back and fix that. Targeting and visibility is what I just spoke about in terms of defining who can see specific questions on the survey. And then we have logic and scoring, which I'll dive into here in a second. And then options is the ability to set things like a question being required or that a photo has to be taken, that kind of stuff. Conditional logic. So logic is important to really kind of create the survey, make it really dynamic, and ensure that only the most relevant questions are being asked. So in this example, we have a question, do they have a bar? And it's a yes or no question, and so we can set it up so that the target answer would be yes, because we want everybody to have a bar, right? We're selling alcohol. So, and then what we can do on the conditional logic side is basically say, well, if they don't have a bar, so they've missed this question, we can set it up to hide, in this case, a cluster that we defined with a series of bar-related questions. So that way we know, okay, we don't need to ask them these series of questions about a bar because they just answered no. But on top of that, if we've peppered bar-related questions throughout the survey, we can add more here to say, well, hide these questions or these clusters as well. So this will really streamline the process as a sales rep is out in the field taking the survey. They have one question, yes or no, and based on that, we can hide a bunch of stuff so they don't have to go through and say, okay, is this question relevant to this account that I'm visiting or not? And then we have scoring. So scoring is pretty straightforward. If the target answer is met, the sales rep can earn points. They can earn an incentive, which in this case is dollars. And you can set it up so that they earn both. But we've taken it a step further for this one. So let's say you have a special on tap handles. I'm using tap handles here again. And let's say you want a sales rep to earn a spiff or a bonus for every tap handle over 2. So you can set a target answer of greater than or equal to 2, and then you can add a score here to say, I'm going to set this as $10 incentive for anything over the target answer, so the amount over. So if the sales rep takes the survey and enters 2, they've hit the target, they would score 10 points, but they wouldn't score any bonus because they've only met the target, they haven't exceeded it. But if they entered 3, they would score 10 points, and they'd earn a $10 spiff, 4, 10 points, and a $20 spiff, and so on. So we think this is going to be a great improvement for really getting out new sales initiatives and pushing things for reps out in the field.
You might be thinking, what is this, a video game that we're creating? You know, this concept of gamification is certainly not new and something that our surveys have been driving for a number of our customers. But if you're not thinking about points, it is a really powerful way to get reps to think about improving their accounts, right? Is if they can take a survey and say that's an 80-point account and they have a goal to get all their accounts to 90, it's a really easy way for them to wrap their head around it, right? Because every time they take that survey, they're going to very easily see these 3 KPIs. If I just knock those out, right, and I can turn them into a yes, it's going to be a 90-point account. I'm going to earn my bonus, right? So,
yeah, and again, like measuring is important, right? These are the leading indicators for how well you're doing. So scoring being so important, we also, what I just showed you there was how to edit scoring for an individual question as you're building the survey. But the next step of the survey process is an overview sheet of all of the questions on the survey and all of the different scoring for those questions. So it gives you that bird's eye view so you can go and edit the whole thing together and see how it affects the whole survey. So that's a real quick brief. I know I just blew through that overview of what dynamic surveys are. This is a highlight what the planned timeline for this stuff. So like I said, we're in the design phase right now. We're looking to kick off development in the coming weeks. And we expect this to take most of 2019. It's a big initiative. It's a very important tool for us and for all of you. So if you have insight, feedback, use cases that we haven't considered, there's still plenty of time. Come talk to us, let us know, so we can incorporate your feedback into what we're building.
Today's the perfect opportunity, while he's here,
right,
to share all of your thoughts on surveys so that we can continue to improve the product.
Yep.
So, cool. Thank you, Jason. Yep. I'm going to try to go through this quickly. Another one of our big upcoming features this year is what we call account plans. So, there were two sort of big buckets that we wanted to address when we moved to Serenity in 2019, and they were steps of the visit and account plans. We've talked about steps of the visit, we've demonstrated it for you, and now we're kind of stepping back, if you will, and saying, okay, I think we've got the part down that this is what the rep should do when they're at the account. We're giving you, the customer or the admin, control to direct, sort of guided selling, if you will. And by the way, all that stuff I talked to you about sequences, completely optional, right? You don't need to turn it on. It's an add-on feature. Now we're going to step back and say, okay, I know what I'm going to do when I'm at the accounts. How am I deciding what accounts to go to, right? And we've been hearing bits and pieces of this over the last 3-4 years. And so we wanted to really sort of thread the needle in between a lot of what Tim has been working on around goaling. So a lot of it is, I've got a list of goals you've given me. I've got a list of key accounts that I call on. You know, what order should I go? When should I go? What should I do? And so we've been really methodical about saying, you know, how do we want to approach this? And there's really kind of 4 main components that we're going to have in 2019. One is a new wizard that will allow the reps to create their account plan. And I'll get to what an account plan is specifically in a minute. Creating the account plan and then being able to collaborate with their manager, supervisor, whoever, to actually have that account plan reviewed and approved, right? So that's something that has been requested a lot, is I want our reps to be able to submit an account plan, get feedback from their manager, either have it be approved or not. The next is what we call the visit scheduler, and that exists in our app today. If you're on one of our later versions, you may already be using it, which is a new drag and drop way of taking an account off of a list and dragging it onto Thursday at 10 o'clock, right? It's just been an easier, faster way to kind of build an agenda, build a schedule of visits. So on its own, it works great, but other than pulling up a list, it's not yet doing anything intelligent to say, have you thought about calling on the Hideout Lounge Tuesday at 10 a.m., right? So we're gonna get to that. We talked about approvals. The last point I wanna make is that we want account plans to be itself something that we can report on, right? So if I'm tasking my team with building account plans, I actually would like, as a manager, to know what percentage of those steps in these of these plans are they actually accomplishing, right? So sort of what we're calling completion percentages. Not the visit that we already talked about. If I'm planning on hitting 20 accounts this week, did I make it to 18? Did I make it to 14? So we want to give you a more systematic way of kind of understanding that set of visits. So we have 2 slides that talk about this in a little more detail. So here's the first example, is I've got my goals down the left. And based on those goals, I've got objectives. If I don't, I should be creating objectives. Tim's going to show you exactly how to do that. But the ideal here is that for every goal, I should have at least 1 objective, if not objectives at multiple accounts to help accomplish that goal. So based on those inputs, I've got my tasks, I've got my objectives that are going to help me accomplish my goals. Now, which accounts do I want to go to? So I'm going to pre-plan a calendar event, right, at account A, and I'm going to go execute that event. And if you follow the color coding here, what we're really saying is, I had an account call on March 15th. I was able to accomplish my first objective. But the other objective, they weren't so sure. They said, you know, let's talk about it in a couple weeks. And so as part of this account plan, I have a second calendar event 2 weeks later where I was able to accomplish my third objective, which, by the way, wasn't due yet, so I didn't even bother with it on my first visit, but I've scheduled it to be part of my second visit. And we were able to accomplish that, but they said no to the second one. They don't want that cocktail on the menu or whatever it is. And so it's really a strategic way of saying, these are the things I want to do. to help move the needle towards accomplishing my goals, right? With the sequences being, once I'm there, now I'm going to actually record all this activity. So on the surface, an account plan can be as simple as, these are the accounts I'm calling Tuesday, these are the accounts I'm calling Wednesday, these are the accounts I'm calling Thursday, and then submitting that to your manager. But the guidance you're going to use to build those visits will be inputs such as your goals, your tasks, your objectives. So that way we're making it as easy as possible for the rep to go to the right accounts, identify those accounts, record that activity, and as Tim will tell you, measure it and then see, are those the accounts I should be calling on next time? Okay. So account plans are coming in the third quarter of this year. If you, again, like surveys, if you have thoughts on this and you have a unique requirement, we'd love to talk to you about it. It is, the kind of the foundation of it is being built after we kick off surveys. And the last comment that I'll make is, in the mobile app, once you have account calls, we envision that it'll be front and center above all these other lists that we're looking at, right? With my key accounts, for example, will be your account plan. So once you have an account plan and it's been approved, it's going to prompt you through, all right, Tuesday, 10 o'clock, Hideout Lounge. By the way, these are the 3 objectives you're going to do. So it'll represent itself just like that list does on the left. You'll have your account plan will be visualized right inside of the account. Okay.
Great. So I have the pleasure of speaking on behalf of the data team today because they're back doing some very important work. So look, data is important, right? And it's part of the value that GreatVines provides. But it's also, there's a lot to it, and it can be a beast to tame. The data team knows that we need to make some improvements here, and so their core focus this year is on improving our systems and moving to a best-in-class, state-of-the-art data integration platform. So we're looking to really standardize our processes and implement some intelligent logic dealing with account data like merges and post-load data changes and that kind of stuff. And so what we believe is that through these efforts throughout this year, we're going to end up with a more scalable, robust, and stable system, better data insights, better data integrity, fewer issues, and faster data load times. And so, like I said, this is their core focus this year is really implementing this new system. That's why they're not here, because they're working on that stuff. So we ask that you work with us, or work with the data team through 2019 as we look to really build this stuff out.
Is anyone in the room right now doing a conversion to SRS data? We have at least one crew. Yeah, so
faster.
Yeah, we're improving the tools we're using to facilitate those types of conversions, right? So whether it will be part of your conversion or not, I don't know yet, but yeah. Good. Anything else you want to share on that?
No, I know we're behind schedule. So.
Yeah, the last thing I want to say is some of you may have used our, what used to be called the Elastic Jobs Manager, EJM. Some of you might have had a login, and that was a way of giving you visibility into whether your jobs failed, loading your data, right? And we're going to be improving that even further. So there'll be new ways for those of you that wrangle data and are worried about, hey, did my depletion data get in last night? You'll have better tools to kind of troubleshoot that and work with our team and identify issues. So, okay, please.
Regarding the dynamic surveys, are you guys dealing with any third parties as far as taking those surveys?
Not yet. So you're talking about third party, like an agency taking it on your behalf, or a whole different
correct.
system?
We're a small company. We don't want to rely on our sales team to go out, and it's typically price surveys.
Yeah.
So we do utilize third party for this.
Yeah.
But seeing, that the tool could reside within GreatVines.
Correct.
Right.
Is that something?
So absolutely.
There
are folks in the room who work with agencies and third-party brand ambassadors and merchandisers that do surveys on their behalf. So that's absolutely something we support. We have the concept of community users that are people that are not direct employees of your company. And we can get them a name and a password that they can go in and just take surveys. So that certainly does exist. We also, as part of the BevPath initiative that you'll hear about much later in the day, we are, as Jason said, rethinking the structure of surveys so that as folks look at, for example, migrating from a Go Spot Check or wanting to bring in Go Spot Check data alongside our data, right? Those are things that would be possible. When you first asked that question, that's where I thought you were going. So anyway, any other questions?
In my lists, will we be able to filter specifically, you said it captures the total, right now, BDN universe in GreatVines?
Yep.
So-
well, depends on your data source, but yeah.
Okay, so we could like look at total, you know, a certain category of wine or spirits sold
Absolutely,
within an entire market, state, region.
So it's slightly different for distributors and suppliers, but I would say 9 out of 10 of our supplier customers are getting an aggregated data universe of accounts that usually is BDN, VIP, could be the old Trade Pulse data feed. And those are all in the system as accounts. And then you can use things like geographic identifiers, territories, what distributor calls on them or delivers to them as ways to build these lists. And they're really no more difficult than filtering an Excel spreadsheet. So if you're familiar with that, that's what would generate all these different lists, right? So key accounts have not called on, well, that's just a metric with the last visit date, give me all the accounts where the last visit date is greater than 30 or 30 days away, that sort of thing. Does that answer your question?
We'll be able to see like sort of the entirety of what that account might purchase, even if we don't currently call on them. You know what I'm saying? Like I would want to be able to target top accounts.
Right.
That,
so no, if you're, it sounds like what you're asking, like scan data, for example, where you would
Right.
see competitor sales into those accounts. That only if you were buying Nielsen scan data directly. No, there are identifiers you can get about an account through Nielsen. We're still a Nielsen partner. You can get TD Links data that will say something like, is this an ethnic restaurant that's fine dining, white tablecloth? We're sort of agnostic to your data source, but.
Yeah, the depletion data you have access to is only your own, only the stuff that you buy.
I'm probably overthinking it, but yeah. But if we have depletion data for that account, we will know every case they bought it, when they bought it from the distributor. That'll all be in the system. Absolutely, yeah. In reporting, yes, exactly. Yes.
I'm not sure if this goes into the agency kind of question, but is there going to ever be any functionality that like several small companies can kind of share resources? So for example, if my sales rep was doing a survey and they saw Kieran's brand in there, and then we can agree that we're sharing resources, is that something that you might be able to open up, like tag other brands?
It's possible. It's not something we've discussed.
Okay.
But it's certainly under this umbrella of BevPath. It doesn't necessarily need to be just supplier and distributor. It could be supplier to supplier.
Just because we're a lot of small brands, like we
Yeah.
share a bunch of resources. So
No, it makes perfect
people
sense.
in our country. So.
It's a cool idea.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll talk about that internally. I like the idea, and it would.
Cool.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about that. So.
Sure.
Not to get too technical, but it sounds like you've made some tremendous improvements in terms of the back-end processing capability, synchronization. I'm curious to know what enabled those changes.
In terms of the new mobile app, so we built a whole new platform based on JavaScript, and we're sitting on top of the APIs for Salesforce. And so Salesforce has some bulk APIs that is what we use for the syncing. That's what gets us to that 2,000 records level. And that's really what creates the speed of the app is, we're just hitting these bulk APIs for a large part, and so we can sync really quickly. We also keep a local data store if you want to get technical. So this is a PWA, so it runs within the browser. We have local data, and it stores all that stuff within the local data store. And that way, when you're making changes in the app, it's saving it to the local database as well as syncing it to Salesforce. And so that creates a much faster method as well.
Yeah, I'd also say that our old app was built with Salesforce's SDK. Those who don't know what that is, Software Development Kit, which meant we were using the tools they gave us. And we were right at the forefront. Every time they had a new version, we would use it. But what came along with that was a lot of overhead, right? A lot of processing overhead and things that we didn't use. So we stripped all that away, right? Now it's just pure JavaScript. JavaScript 6, which is the latest standard, which is incredibly fast, just talking straight to these APIs. So that's a big part of what's enabled it. There's something I didn't get to show this morning with some of the technical snafus that I just thought I'd share with you, because it was asked a couple times over lunch.
You okay with the mic? Or?
Yeah, I'm okay with this for now. Everyone can hear me, I'm sure. I can get very boomy if you'd like. Okay, so in our application, we talked about visit sequences, but I didn't get to show you how they're created, which is pretty spiffy. So currently, it's sort of buried in your list of all the different GreatVines apps and objects. Those of you that are admins are familiar with kind of finding some of these objects. So way down at the bottom, we have this called visit sequences. And so the way this is working is a little bit like a survey plan, right? They have to be active, so you can build them and play with them. Before you make them active, they won't go live. And so you can see I've got multiple different active sequences. And the system, what it's going to do is always pick the most specific one, which means you could have a national on-premise sequence. So just for any on-premise account, these are the 8 things we want them to do, or the 4 things we want them to do. But you can overlay with that a very specific sequence for one segment, for one geography, right? So if this is Metro New York, fine dining, these are the 12 steps I want them to do. And it will always take the more specific sequence. So the way that these look, I'll just show you the example we looked at before, which was off-premise. You can see here, just some basic details. It's active. It is set to enforce the order. And when we edit this, you'll see in the Serenity framework, this new UI that we have. So across the top, we've given it a name, just off-premise summit. This is where we could drill down and say we want the fine dining segment. Thank you, off-premise. Okay, so let's go like, is there a fine wine shop? Thank you. It's only taken me 10 years to learn this industry. Just kidding. Geography keys. Many of you probably don't use geography keys, but we have the ability to create these geographies that may or may not align to your territories. So a geography key could be South America. It could be downtown Los Angeles, right? It's very generic. But again, so you can tailor your sequence, your steps of the visit. And then even as we've said, we've taken one extra step, which is to do it at the profile level. So using the example, Alexis was just talking about the BFG folks that are just doing the event report forms. You could actually have them have an on-premise sequence that's nothing but fill in your event report form and then click end visit, right? You could even do it, start the visit when the event starts and then end the visit when the event ends, and you can actually see how long the event took place. So you can get very specific, not just geographically, but by the user type. But the really exciting part is down here, sort of bearing the lead. So on this left list, you see a bunch of different sort of options, right? New account call, new activity, new calendar event, new photo. And you drag these from the left into the right. And so what this starts out with is just start visit sequence, end visit sequence. Those are required steps for obvious reasons, so they're red. Everything else in here we've actually dragged in from the left and reordered. This is an active sequence, so it's not letting me change it, which it shouldn't. So I'll show you an example. If we leave this page and we make a new one. Here, I'll just clone it, actually. Summit 2. Click Save. Exactly. It's fine. So this is summit number 2, and this is where a perfect example, right? Start visit, end visit, and you craft kind of all the steps that are in between. So maybe we start with the dashboard, which is the example you saw before. That automatically is telling the app, view the account dashboard for this, whether it's on-premise or off-premise. Since they're not really interacting with it, I mean, you can require it in the sense that they've got to at least click on it and look at it, but how do you know what they're really looking at? You just know that they're loading the dashboard, right? So clicking required on that is optional. We also have, let's say that you have an intranet app for your company that is running also on the device. Maybe it's an iOS app. Or our friends from Inventive here, for example, Pocket Advantage, you need to take an order. You can make a required step in that sequence to open up Pocket Advantage, take the order, and then come back and continue the sequence, right? So it's not just our functionality, it's also partner apps and other sites. Good call on that. So yeah, you could drag mobile button in there, and then under mobile button, you'd be able to click it down and say which custom app or the goal planning step, or I want to look at Yelp and look at their Yelp reviews or whatever you want. You can do that. And if you just drag it down here, just deletes it, right? We talked about list views. So just like the concept of my lists and the lists that people see on the homepage, Serenity's full of lists. You can actually put a whole list into the sequence. So maybe I'm going to be selling in a program. Maybe a good idea is to look at my list of active programs, right? So I can make that a step in my sequence as well. The one that's most dynamic, some of these are fairly straightforward. Add a photo, take an order, put a follow-up task, put a calendar event, is this new activity, right? So this is where we say a new activity, and you pick from the activity list. Now, some of you that are wine only, or like the NAB FIFCO guys that are beer only, well, not really beer only, but mostly beer, they may not want wine list as an activity. We might have, for them, we might have renamed that to tap handle, or we might have, who knows what, right? So whatever that is in your language will show up here, and you can make that a required step, right? So any of these steps on the left, we can mark them as required. And again, right now, we're not set to enforce the order. So it's going to, I'm going to click start. It's going to give me these 3 options plus the option to end. And the only thing required right now is to add a menu placement or wine list placement, because I happen to mark that required. Otherwise, if I turn that off, they could start the visit and immediately end the visit. Nothing's required. We're not enforcing that they go through. And then, of course, if we come to the top and click enforce order, then they're going to be required to click on each one. And when they try to go to the 5th step, it'll actually warn them and say, no, you need to do this in sequence, right? So that's pretty exciting. We're anxious to get it into your hands and out to your users and get feedback from you. Yes. Right. If you try to end the visit and you have required steps and you're not enforcing that they go through the order, they get an alert, a warning. We don't currently lock them in the visit. I mean, if they need to finish the visit, they can finish the visit, but we're at least alerting them. You have required steps that are incomplete, which I could demo on this, but you can't see it, so sorry about that. But I'm happy to show you one-on-one if you want to see more of it in action. We've got the devices. So. Yep. I don't know if it will tell it. No, it didn't tell me there. But yes, if when you start the visit, and you notice I'm just loading this is our mobile app just running inside of a browser, right? Because again, it's a web-based application. If any of these were required, we would not be able to like go straight to follow-up task, for example, and then just click end visit. So this is designed to be the simplest. Get in, get out, and you're done, right? And we can see here we recorded this on the 12th at 2 p.m., and it was an account visit. Well, at least we created a visit. But if we were to use the timing and you had I think we call it duration, on your reports, you would know that your rep logged that visit in all of 5 seconds, right? So that'd be useful information. Any questions on that?
We had an interesting question earlier that isn't directly related to this, but can the Serenity app run in the browser on a computer offline?
It can, absolutely. And sorry, I had to hit that button. If we go to network, I can turn it offline right now. So there we go. So we are offline. I've not disabled his Wi-Fi, but I've turned the app offline, so it's got no data coming in, no data coming out. And so if I go full screen, right, we've still got all this data about the account. If I want to edit the details, make some updates, look at who my contacts are, maybe I need to add a new CRM. Users of our old app know that we were a little more aggressive about if the app thinks it's offline, it turned red at the top, and we alerted the user. And I think we might have gone a little overboard at, it's probably something the users don't need to worry about, right? So our philosophy in the last 2 years is, as we think about designing this new app, let's just not even really make it an issue, right? We don't want the reps staring at the device saying, oh, why is the cog spinning? Or why is it not spinning? Or when is my next sync? They shouldn't have to worry about any of that. The app handles it for you, right? What they should worry about is, do they have the right data? Are they logging the right activities? So in this little notification app, even though it plans on syncing at 2:44, the first thing you see is the app's offline. At 2:10, we went offline, right? If the app comes back online at 2:44, it'll start syncing in the background, whether the app is running or not, right? So that's an important differentiator. But yeah, we can perform those visits, we can upload photos. Log the calls.
Is view a embedded dashboard.
Right, okay, thank you. Google Maps and dashboards are live from the web, right? And that's consistent with our old app. When you went offline, the dashboards stopped loading. That's because we're loading them in real time. We don't save all those dashboards to show you offline. There's just too much computing power required and information required, so. Great questions. Anyone else? I think we're going to... No? To get to this app? Yes. No. So just like you don't need to be online to load Gmail on your device, or those of you that have used Google Slides or Google Sheets, you've seen in the past where it says, would you like this available offline? We're basically turning that on by default for all of your data. So we're running that sync process whether you want it or not. No, once you need to be online to log in, that 5-second window, right? And that's what I didn't really get to demonstrate. I was going to demonstrate it on this device, was starting from scratch, not logged in, right? It's basically, you authenticate, it takes you right to the screen and you're up and running. No more waiting 15 minutes or 10 minutes for it to sync. Or what most of you don't see, which we see, which is, okay, we then go make a little change in your system because you've asked for a new feature. We make that change, we hit sync, we wait 15 minutes. We test it, did it work? Oops, I forgot to do this. We make the change, we hit sync, we wait 15 minutes. We don't have to deal with any of that anymore, which is great. So our ability to support you and your ability to support your users will be much more responsive because it's much closer to real time. John? Yes, do you want to remind me of what we're saying about that?
Look, I mean, you may have a vice president of sales or a national sales manager that has access to 600,000 accounts in your system and just way too much data, and you don't even want them syncing because they might be doing over, using up their cellular plan. You can set users to be online only. So the app, it works like any app that only works when it's online, which is half the things on your iPad only really work when they're functionally connected to the internet, right? Like Spotify. Well, Spotify has offline, but whatever. So yeah, you can set those users. So the app works fine, but it'll never try and sync anything offline. It'll just only work while they're connected. And I would think for a lot of maybe higher level users in the organization, you don't know where they're traveling to, that sort of thing. You just tell them, yeah, sorry, it's only going to work while you're connected, but it's a good solution for those types of folks.
Yep, I forgot about that actually. But yeah, that's a per user setting that we can enable, so that way we don't swamp their brand new iPhone 8 with 200 gigabytes of their videos and account data. So, yes, one more.
So just to say something obvious, what you're talking about is specifically the client apps that you've installed in your devices. If they were going through a browser natively, that wouldn't work offline, or is that?
So, yes and no. If I'm offline and I've already run Serenity in, say, my Chrome browser on my phone, it actually will run. Because Chrome knows that it's an app. It's got what's called a manifest, and it knows where the data is stored locally, and it can get to it. A lot of modern websites today are creating that manifest for that reason, so that way if your connection is spotty, they can at least show you something. They may not be able to show you the new ad, but they're going to at least keep you on their website, keep you from going somewhere else. We basically do the same thing. So for our Windows users out there, so I believe most of the Campari team, for example, is on Windows 10. We've got some other customers on Windows 10. I think you guys are on Windows 10. Yeah, so whether you use, I wouldn't recommend using Microsoft Edge, but if you start with Chrome and you log in on Windows, the very first thing it asks you, do you want to install GreatVines? And it's an icon on your desktop. So to add a little bit of color to this, that for those that care, apologies to those that don't, Apple, Microsoft, and Google are all on this progressive web app train, this thing that we're on called PWAs. The only problem is Apple is a laggard. Apple is lagging behind on full support for this technology. It works, but what they don't allow us to do yet is to put a pretty little GreatVines icon on your iPhone home screen. You have to do it through the browser. That is supposedly coming in the next version of Apple's iOS 12.2, I think. So we are every week following where are all three of these providers with this technology. The great news is the Google, Android, Chromebook, and Windows 10 all work great. Log into Serenity, click a button, you have an app. It works offline. And Apple will be close behind. So I know we've got a lot of iPad users. The good news is the app is available. We just can't yet put an icon. It's treated more like a bookmark for now.